The afternoon sun spilled molten gold over the Vidian estate, dappling the marble columns and sprawling garden with warm light. Birds chirped in lazy harmony with the rustle of the breeze. But inside the grand sitting room of the Elamine mansion, tension crackled like a live wire. "You're what?" Leona's voice sliced through the still air, sharp and disbelieving. Her father, Senator Abdul Rahman Alameen, stood near the hearth with an expression of practiced calm. His hands adorned with an ancestral gold ring folded neatly. In front of him, "You heard me, Leona. The president himself has extended a proposal. He wishes for you to marry his son." "Is this a joke?" Leona's rich brown eyes flared with indignation. "You're telling me I'm being handed off like some ceremonial trinket, just because you and the president played golf together in your youth?" Senator Elamine gave a small sigh and turned toward the window. "Liana, this is not just about history, it's about legacy. President Aramu has been a friend, yes, but also an ally, a man I trust deeply. This union would secure our family's place in the nation's future." Liana crossed the Persian rug barefoot, her silk kaftan swishing around her ankles. "And what about my future, Baba? Does that not matter?" He turned slowly to face her. "Your future will be gilded. This family is already influential. But through this marriage, your children will be the bloodline of 2 dynasties." Liana bit down on her lip and turned her face away, blinking furiously. There was a time she thought love would guide her path. That she'd meet someone who saw her, not just her pedigree, but lately, her world had felt more like a chessboard, and she, a queen to be sacrificed. She moved toward the glass doors, flinging them open. The garden outside lay in fragrant bloom, but the scent of roses didn't soothe her today. "I've heard of him, you know, Ted Rameau, the invisible prince. He doesn't attend state dinners, he avoids cameras, and when he does appear, he looks through people like they don't exist. He's private," her father said. She spun on her heel. "He's disabled, Baba. You didn't think that was worth mentioning." You stiffened. "He was in an accident 3 years ago. I didn't hide it. I simply didn't see it as a reason to reject him, but it is to me. I don't even know him. And now you want me to marry a man who hides from the world, who might not even want this any more than I do." Abdul Rahman approached her, resting a heavy hand on her shoulder. "He agreed to the marriage, Liana. And that means something." She stared into her father's eyes, searching for a hint of doubt, but found only quiet resolution. She knew that look. He wasn't going to change his mind. What if he's cold? What if I spend my life beside a stranger who can't stand me? His face softened, then melt the cold. "If anyone can, it's you." That night, Liana lay awake in her canopied bed, the ceiling lost in the gloom above. The fan hummed lazily overhead, but her thoughts churned violently. Images of Tade, images she'd never actually seen, played like broken film reels. She'd heard rumors, a car crash, a spinal injury, that he'd once been a commanding presence, charismatic and sought after, and now, he was a ghost. She buried her face in her pillow. How could she marry a man who had vanished from society, who might be broken in spirit as well as body? But more than fear, it was the unfairness that scraped at her. Her entire life had been planned, scheduled, locked in by expectations she hadn't written. She was 27, a graduate of King's College, London, with a passion for architecture and a portfolio she'd built in secret. And now she was expected to disappear into a man's shadow again. 2 days later, a convoy of black SUVs pulled into the estate. From the upstairs balcony, Liana watched as President Aramu stepped out, flanked by aides and charcoal suits. He walked with the grace of a man unburdened by doubt. She met him in the foyer. "Mr. President," she said, bowing her head in courtesy. He smiled warmly, his eyes twinkling beneath thick silver brows. "Lana, you've grown into your mother's elegance and your father's fire." She nodded, careful. "You honor me." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I know this is sudden, and I know you have doubts, but let me speak as a father, not a president. My son is not what people say he is. He is more, much more." Liana's lips twitched. "Then why hide him?" The president's smile thinned. Because this country feeds on weakness, and Tate is no weak man, but he has known pain. He doesn't trust easily. He was once a lion. The world turned on him, and he went silent. But he agreed to meet you, and that alone is everything. Will he attend the engagement dinner? He will. The president paused, and he asked that I not pressure you, but Liana give him a chance. The engagement dinner was a tapestry of extravagance. Gold-rimmed plates, crystal chandeliers strung like stars across the ballroom ceiling, dignitaries in flowing and sequin, gowns gathered under the glow of 100 chandeliers. Musicians played soft highlife in the background, but Totema was late. Liana sat at the long table beside her father, her stomach tight as a drum. She smiled at guests, nodded through pleasantries, but every tick of the clock pounded like a countdown in her head. When the doors finally parted, silence fell like a thunderclap. He entered with a quiet intensity. Tedramu was tall, broader than she'd imagined. He moved slowly, aided by a sleek black cane, but not with pity or weakness. He moved like a man who had wrestled fate and survived. His suit was impeccably tailored, and though a faint scar traced the left side of his jaw, it only heightened the enigmatic air around him. His eyes, a stormy grey, surprisingly sharp, met hers across the room, and held. For a second, she forgot how to breathe. He walked toward her, each step deliberate. No one dared interrupt. When he reached her, he extended a hand. Miss Elamine, I've heard you're more stubborn than a diplomat in deadlock. A slow, reluctant smile touched her lips, and I heard you were a ghost with a grudge. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. Not a ghost, not dead yet. She took his hand. It was warm, firm, alive, and something inside her shifted. Later that evening, as the moon cast silver veins over the estate, Tate stood beside her on the balcony, watching the stars. Their silence wasn't awkward. It was laced with an unsaid curiosity. Why agree to this? She asked quietly. He didn't. Turned to her, because I was tired of people making decisions for me. Same. He glanced at her then. So maybe we start there. We agree on nothing except that we're both being forced into this. She turned to meet his gaze. Then let's make a deal. No illusions, no fake smiles. If we're doing this, we do it our way. A slow knowing smirk tugged at his lips. Agreed, but I should warn you, Miss Elamine. I've never been very good at doing things halfway. Their eyes locked. For the first time, she didn't see a broken man. She saw a fire waiting to burn. The last of the champagne fizzed in her veins as Liana climbed the sweeping staircase of her family's home. Heels in hand, silk gown whispering behind her like an afterthought. The hallway was dim and quiet, save for the faint click of security. Lights humming awake as she passed. It should have been the end to a magical night. Glamour, music, a man's eyes locking with hers across a ballroom, but her hands curled into fists as she reached her room. She slammed the door. The engagement dinner had been a spectacle. Expensive smiles and political handshakes. But beneath the polished veneer of tradition, she'd felt the truth crawl beneath her skin. She was being ushered into a marriage she hadn't chosen. Even worse, she had been watched like a jewel being passed from one case to another. And Tate, Aramu, enigmatic, controlled, scarred, observant, had said all the right things without revealing anything at all. Too perfect, she muttered. The moonlight cut silver stripes across her floor. She slipped out of the gown, yanked on soft lounge pants and a hoodie, and tied her braids up into a loose bun. A suitcase waited in the corner. She dragged it out. Earlier, almost in spite of herself before the dinner, she opened it now with a sharp click. The empty belly of it stared up at her like an accusation. Fine. If she had no say in the who, she'd take charge of the how. She pulled open drawers, folded her favorite Ankara wrap skirts, her comfortable silk shirts, the denim jacket she'd worn through college. Her hands moved mechanically at first, but then faster. Like every item she packed was a little defiance against the faceless machine deciding her future. Her jewelry went into a velvet case. Lip glosses, her favorite lotion, that smelled like coconut in defiance. Perfumes, one sensual, one soft, one meant to say, "Don't try me today." She stood on a stool to reach the highest shelf and pulled down a small wooden box. Inside were old sketches, villa designs, inked fantasies of modern African courtyards, and houses she dreamed of building one day. She hesitated, then added them to the suitcase. She wasn't going to be a political doll in some locked palace. She'd bring her whole self, even if he never asked. She was zipping the first suitcase closed when a soft knock came at the door. She tensed. "Yes," she called. The door creaked open, just enough for the light to pull through. A middle-aged servant, named Idaroth, draped in a navy boa and matching head wrap, stepped inside with practiced deference. "Forgive me, Miss Liana. I was sent to deliver a message." Liana stood straight. "From who?" "From Mr. Aramo." She clasped her hands together gently. "He says to inform you, you are not to bring anything when you come. Everything you need will be provided." For a long second, Liana didn't speak. Then come again. Ayerth, clearly uncomfortable, shifted her feet. "He said to bring nothing." Miss Liana blinked out. "Not even clothes." He said, and I quote, "Tell her, I meant everything." The silence in the room thickened, but not from confusion. From fury, Liana stared at the servant, half expecting her to flinch under the weight of her silence. But Aymed had worked in the Ilamine household long enough to recognize a storm when she saw one, and to stay still while it passed. "Did he give a reason?" Liana asked, her voice dangerously calm. "No, miss, only that bring nothing." She blinked. Slowly. "Nothing at all." "No, miss." Liana's jaw tensed. The click of the suitcase's zipper behind her echoed like mockery. She folded her arms across her chest. "And he sent you to tell me this. I was nearby. Your father asked me to pass it on." Liana's breath hitched as something sharp twisted beneath her ribs. Of course, of course. He didn't even deliver the message himself. Not a phone call, not a voice note, not even a single text to explain. Just a royal decree delivered like she was some provincial bride being summoned to a king's house. She gave a sharp nod. "Fine, thank you, Ya. You may go." The servant bowed her head. "As you wish, Miss." Once the door shut behind her, Liana spun toward the suitcase. All her carefully folded belongings, now suddenly invalid. Her fingers twitched at her sides, itching to hurl something across the room. Bring nothing. Who the hell did he think he was? It wasn't the request that stung. It was the assumption. The silent message behind the words. "You don't need your things. I will define your new world." Liana stomped toward the suitcase, yanked it open with a violence that made the zipper groan. She stared at the bright silk folds, the gold bracelet her grandmother had given her, the delicate perfume bottles that reminded her she was her own woman. Bring nothing. That was a command, not a request. A line drawn in the sand, a flex of power disguised as kindness. The anger rose so quickly she could taste it. It was bitter. She grabbed a shirt and flung it across the room. Then a pair of heels. A bottle of lotion crashed against the wardrobe with a hollow thunk. Her sketchbook tumbled off the bed and landed open on a page where she had once drawn a courtyard filled with light and plants. A home that belonged to her. She stood there, panting, watching her things lie like fallen soldiers around her. The room was silent, heavy with her rage. That was it. She marched out the door. Her feet patted furiously over the polished marble floor. The echo of her steps chasing her down the corridor like a drum roll of outrage. She passed a staff member who opened his mouth to greet her, then wisely decided otherwise. The door to her father's study was ajar, golden light spilling out in a warm line. She didn't knock. Senator Abdul Ramon Elamine was seated at his carved mahogany desk. Glasses perched low on his nose, thumbing through a bound diplomatic dossier. The air smelled faintly of piped tobacco, aged wood, and the faint musk of legacy. Classical piano played from the speaker tucked into the bookcase. A Chopin nocturne, the kind her father claimed helped him think globally. He looked up with the measured calm of a man who had weathered too many political storms to be rattled by his own daughter's fury. "Yes, Liana," She stormed in and planted herself in front of his desk like a protest banner. "Did you tell your friend, the president's son, that I'm incapable of packing my own damn underwear?" Abdul Rahman arched one thick brow. "I assume you're referring to Tate's message, 'Bring nothing,'" she snapped. "Everything will be provided. What am I, an orphan being adopted? A refugee of the elite class?" He placed a silk bookmark into the crease of his document and folded his hands. "You're being dramatic, am I? Because right now, I'm not sure if I'm being married or relocated. There's a difference." His mouth twitched. Not a smile, the faintest sign of fatigue. Tate is particular. He does things deliberately. If he says something, there's usually a reason. Liana threw her hands up. "That's not a reason. That's a power play, a control move, and you're just fine." With that, he leaned back, lacing his fingers over his stomach. He was respectful enough to send word, "And you are not without your voice. You've made your feelings quite known." "That's not the same thing as being heard, Baba." A silence stretched between them, heavy and brittle. You sighed, finally. "Listen, my daughter, you think you understand power, but you've only seen it from this side of the table. Tate has lived in its shadow. He's not trying to insult you. If he says bring nothing, perhaps he means to offer you a clean start, a fresh chapter, a fresh prison." He chuckled softly. "You always were theatrical." She clenched her fists. "This isn't a play, Baba, it's my life." He met her gaze steadily. "Then live it inside or outside that house. You are still Liana El-Amin, a name that opens doors. Do not cheapen yourself by arguing over luggage." It was the calm dismissal in his tone that lit the final fuse. That detached patriarchal authority, like he was a judge and she was just a petitioner overstating her case. "Fine," she spat. "Do what you want. He wants a bride with no baggage. He'll get one." She spun on her heel and stormed out, her breath shaking with each furious inhale as she turned the corner of the hallway. Her lips curled around the thought before she could stop it. He's too damn annoying for a man who can't even walk unassisted. And yet, even as she thought it, something cold flickered in her chest. Guilt already creeping in. But she didn't stop. Back in her room, the chaos she'd left behind stared at her like an accusation. Her clothes lay scattered, the perfume bottle cracked and leaking onto the tile. Her jewelry box half opened like a mouth mid-gasp. The suitcase sat wide open, yawning. Uselessly, Liana slammed the door shut with her heel and let out a noise that was somewhere between a growl and a scream. "Too damn annoying," she muttered. "For a man who can't even walk unassisted." The words slithered from her tongue like poison. Her voice was low, bitter, coated in frustration. But the moment they left her lips, she regretted them. She stood there, still listening to the echo of her own cruelty hanging in the air. God, it wasn't just the words, it was what they revealed. She pressed her hands to her face, forcing her breath to slow. That wasn't fair. She didn't know what Tate's condition really was. Didn't know what he'd endured. She didn't even know the full truth of the accident. Only the whispers that flitted around him like shadows. A car crash, a surgery gone wrong, something about months in Switzerland. But none of it gave her the right to lash out like that. Still, why did everyone treat him like a sacred mystery? She dropped her hands and started to pace, bare feet brushing across the rug. Long strides punctuated by muttered thoughts. He could have said it nicer or explained or texted like a normal person. She imagined his voice again, deep textured, confident despite the calm. Not weak, not shy, just unreadable. That somehow made it worse. She stopped in front of her vanity and stared at her own reflection. Her cheeks were flushed, her braid was fraying at the edges, and her hoodie was bunched at the neck. She looked like a woman pulled in two directions, princess and prisoner. "I'm not a charity case," she whispered. "And I don't need to be told what to need." She glanced at the shattered lotion bottle, then bent down to pick up the pieces. Her movements were slower now, not defeated, just exhausted, emotionally bruised. She wasn't used to being handled. That's what this felt like. Not seduction, not even kindness, just precision. Like she was a piece in a puzzle he already had the box image for. She hated that. She hated even more that it was working. How his choices were making her think, making her question things she thought she was certain about. She dropped the broken glass into the trash. Then she looked at her suitcase. The suitcase loomed like a monument to indecision. Liana stood over it, arms folded, jaw tight. Half the contents were now spilled across the room in her earlier rage. But some items still rested within neatly folded blouses, a silk scarf, a pair of midnight blue heels she'd worn to her graduation dinner. They looked oddly out of place now, like relics from a past life. She crouched down and ran a hand across the fabric. Her fingers hesitated on a blouse with little embroidered suns across the collar. A gift from her mother, one of the last she had given before she passed. "Bring nothing," he had said. She could almost hear his voice again. Measured, absolute. No room for negotiation. Not rude, not demanding, just sure of himself. Too sure. She sat on the floor with a heavy sigh, legs folded beneath her, and stared into the suitcase for a long time. The silence of the room pressed in against her, quiet, weighty, full of things unsaid. Was he trying to erase her or protect her? It was impossible to tell. The only thing more maddening than being ordered around was not knowing why. With slow, deliberate movements, she began to unpack. One shirt, then another. Each item went back to its place, into drawers onto hangers folded neatly. She wasn't giving in. She was stalling, reserving judgment. That's what she told herself anyway. She reached for the last object in the suitcase, her sketchbook. Fingers hovered this one she hesitated over. The leather cover was worn from use. The corners softened from years of flipping. Within it were her blueprints, her designs, her dream villas built under sun-drenched skies, her imagined life on paper. She flipped it open to a drawing of a house with no stairs, just wide, smooth ramps that curved between courtyards, surrounded by trees. It had been a design she made as a challenge for a disability-inclusive home before she ever knew who Tate Aramu was. That thought gave her pause. She closed the book and traced her name on the inside cover. Then, without explanation, she slipped it into her handbag and zipped it shut. "Just one thing," she murmured to the empty room. "Screw your rules." She stood slowly, brushing her palms down her thighs, suddenly feeling steadier. If he wanted her to come with nothing, fine. But she'd still come as herself, and she wouldn't let him or anyone forget that. The makeup artist had a careful hand and a nervous smile. She dabbed at Liana's cheekbone with a highlight brush, the glow catching the light just right. Another hand adjusted the veil, stepped back, tilted her head, then moved in again to fix a fold in the fabric. The room buzzed with stylists, assistants, planners moving like bees. Soft voices, gentle perfume, the rustle of silk and chiffon. But Liana sat still in the chair like a statue carved out of reluctance. The mirror in front of her reflected perfection. A fitted off-shoulder gown in a creamy ivory that hugged her torso and flowed in delicate waves to the floor. Her neck shimmered with pearls. Her eyes were smoky and deliberate, lips dusted with a deep plum tone that made her look like a queen from some old-world painting. She was beautiful, and she was frowning. Her eyes were hollow beneath all the shimmer. Her lips pressed thin the moment the gloss dried. The corners of her mouth refused to lift. No matter how gently the stylist cooped compliments around her. There was a soft knock. Then the door opened. Her father stepped in, dressed in deep navy embroidered with golden threading, his cap perched neatly on his head. The room cleared instinctively at the weight of his presence. He stepped closer, gazing at her through the mirror. "You look just like your mother did," he said softly, "but fiercer." Liana gave a tight nod, eyes still on her reflection. "You're not smiling," he said. "I noticed," she replied. He hesitated behind her, unsure whether to laugh or sigh. "Liana, my dear, today is not a battle." "No," she said, voice low. "Then why does it feel like surrender?" He moved to crouch beside her, his large hands folding over hers in her lap. "I won't pretend I understand everything you feel right now, But I do know this. People are watching, and not just today, always. She turned her head slightly, just enough to meet his eyes. So I'm a display piece. No, he said, you're an And in public, we walk with our heads high and our hearts tucked close. She held his gaze a moment longer, then gave a short, exhausted nod. Smile for me, Liana, he said gently. Just for today. Her lips curved, not joyfully, not even convincingly. Just enough, he kissed her forehead. The door opened again. It's time. The courtyard was a garden carved into elegance. Tall, arching trees framed the space like cathedral pillars draped in white orchids and golden lanterns. Guests were seated in orderly rows. Politicians, billionaires, media giants, society women in head wraps, stiff with pride. There were cameras, but not too many. The kind of privacy money could buy. The kind of attention no one could really escape. Liana stepped through the stone arch on her father's arm. Gasps rippled quietly like wind through silk. All eyes turned toward her as her veil fluttered gently in the breeze. The live band paused, just long enough for the officiant's voice to carry over the soft buzz of Sika's. Tate sat waiting at the altar. He wore black, not navy, not charcoal. Black, cut to brutal perfection. The lines of his custom-made jacket were sharp against the brushed silk of his white shirt. A single silver pin glinted on his chest. A minimalist emblem of the Aramu family crest. And then, of course, the chair. It's like quiet matte black metal with gold trim on the wheels. Not medical, not apologetic. It looked engineered, designed. For someone who didn't want pity. He didn't smile when she approached, but his eyes found hers and held. She walked slower than necessary, not out of grace, but calculation. If I must walk to him, he will feel every step. When they stood before each other, the officiant welcomed the families, spoke of heritage, of legacy, quoted old proverbs about union and power and trust. Tate's hand rested on the arm of his chair, strong, calm, pale, knuckled. Liana's bouquet shook slightly in her grip. When it was time for vows, his voice was the first to break the silence. I tattoo take you Liana Elamine with honor, with intent, with no false promise except that I will always tell you the truth. His words were like glass, clear, hard, cold. There was a pause, not long, but long enough to feel the tension stretch like string between them. Then Liana, lifting her chin a little higher, spoke evenly. I, Liana Elamine, take you Taramu, as you are, as I am. No illusions. A murmur from the crowd, the officiant, continued with rings and final words. And when it was time, you may kiss the bride. Tade leaned forward slowly, his hand reaching up to cup her waist. Liana let him. Their lips touched. No fire, no spark, just contact. Two statues made of obligation. Cameras clicked. When they turned to face the guests, hands clasped for show. Liana's eyes didn't shine. She smiled, but only with her mouth. The sun set slow in gold, melting into dusk over the estate, as the reception bloomed like a second wedding altogether. The Aramu estate's lower gardens had been transformed into a twilight dream. Soft fairy light strung through acacia trees, glass tables set with white roses and crystals. A live jazz band, playing sultry Yoruba harmonies with a western edge. Servers glided past, carrying champagne flutes. Tiny plates of puff-puffs, dusted with edible gold. Suya bites on toothpicks carved like elephants. There was laughter, applause, cameras flashing. One of the ministers stood and toasted to the Union of Titans. Someone else said something about national stability and legacies being secured. Every voice in the crowd was polished, elegant, manicured. But Liana sat at the sweetheart table like a beautifully dressed ghost. Tade remained beside her, composed, hands folded in his lap, nodding when appropriate, lips barely moving. Not cold, but unreadable. She hated that he didn't sweat, he didn't flinch, didn't even blink too often. The only time he looked her way was when someone was watching. Liana sipped her wine, then sipped again. Fake smile, not, thank you, that's kind smile. Yes, we're very excited, S. She felt like her own puppet. The strings were tight and gold-laced. She danced once with her father, then once more briefly with Tate. He placed his hands gently on her hips, while his chair pivoted with fluid grace like he'd rehearsed this. She leaned in just enough. Not too close, not too far. "We're a performance," she muttered into his ear. He didn't respond though. A faint twitch at the corner of his mouth could have been a smirk, or nothing. "Excuse me," she said too suddenly. Stepping away, Tade let her go without protest. The music faded behind her as Liana stepped into the quieter wing of the house, heels clicking against marble. She moved with quick precision the way a woman escapes from a room without being chased. Her veil trailed over her arm like an abandoned flag. She passed the hallway where guests were still laughing, toasting, spinning on the dance floor under chandeliers and string lights. She found her father near the fountain, smiling graciously at a retired general and sipping palm wine from a crystal cup. He noticed her instantly. Fathers always did. "Leaving already?" he asked, his tone low and warm. She exhaled. "I'm tired. I've been smiling since morning. I can feel the muscles dying." He chuckled softly. A tragedy indeed. She tilted her head. "You don't mind?" He gave her a knowing look. No one remembers how long the bride stayed, only how gracefully she left. She leaned forward and kissed his cheek. "Thanks, Bubba." Then she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, "I don't like it here." He didn't ask her to explain, just smoothed her veil and whispered back, "Then don't let it swallow you." A woman in black lace approached silently. One of the Aramo household maids, neither too old nor too young, expressionless. "If you're ready, madam," the woman said quietly. Liana nodded, straightened her shoulders, and followed. They passed through hallways she'd never seen before. This part of the estate felt older, colder, less like luxury, more like legacy, darker wood, deeper silence. There was a faint scent of bergamot and aged leather in the air, like memory and money. No one else passed them. No one spoke. They reached a tall wooden door carved with sweeping vines and symbols. The maid opened it without knocking. "This is yours," she said, stepping aside. Liana walked in. The door shut softly behind her with a heavy finality, like the closing of a vault. Liana stepped into the room slowly, uncertain. No one had told her what to expect. No tours, no instructions, just this space, now hers in a home that didn't feel like it could ever belong to her. It was beautiful. A soft blend of modern and traditional. Blackwood floors, wide cream curtains, tied with gold tassels. A bed big enough to sleep 6 people, crowned with sheer white netting. Sculpted wall lamps gave the room a golden glow. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and something darker. Something masculine, maybe cologne etched into the very air, but it was the door to the left. Half-open mirrorland that drew her eye. She crossed the room barefoot, the train of her wedding gown dragging slightly behind her like it was tired, too. She pushed the door open with one hand and froze. The dressing room stretched wide and deep, lit by recessed lights in the ceiling. On both sides, floor-to-ceiling shelves overflowed with clothes. Designer labels she recognized, and some she didn't. Arranged by color and season, dresses in every cut and fabric, structured blazers, soft caftans, couture, evening gowns, leather, skirts, custom denim, hanging racks of cashmere sweaters and silk robes. And in the center, a glass island displaying rows of sunglasses, bracelets, silk scarves and fragrance bottles lined like soldiers. She turned. Shoes, so many shoes, flats, heels, boots, sandals, a wall of them. Every size tag she glimpsed was hers on the far end. Bags, Hermes, Chanel, custom Yoruba prints shaped into clutches with beaded handles. Even her favorite Nigerian indie designer, somehow impossibly, was here too. She stepped further in. Everything in this room had been curated. For her, not just for a woman, for Liana. The colors she wore, the silhouettes she preferred, her scent preferences. It was eerie and invasive. She felt a flush rise up her neck as she turned in a slow circle, arms slightly out like she was lost inside some high-end trap. "This," she whispered, is why you told me to bring nothing." The realization hit her like a quiet slap. It hadn't been laziness. It wasn't arrogance. It was preparation. He had built a world around her down to the hanger, and he hadn't said a word. She reached out, grabbed a gold-fringed wrapped dress off the rack, and ran her fingers over the fabric. Soft, perfectly tailored. Was this supposed to impress her? Was this control disguised as generosity, or had he paid attention? She felt her heart race, a strange blend of awe and fury stirring beneath her ribs. Her throat tightened. "You don't even know me," she wanted to scream. "How could you possibly know what I want?" She looked around, surrounded by opulence, unsure whether she had just inherited a kingdom or walked into a beautifully appointed cage, and in the deepest part of her mind, one thought whispered, uninvited. What else has he planned? The water hit her skin like warm silk. Liana stood under the rainfall shower, eyes closed, letting the day melt from her muscles in slow waves. Her makeup had been wiped clean. Her scalp breathed freely now that her veil and pins were gone. The steam filled the bathroom like a quiet fog, blurring the edges of the marble and gold fittings around her. It was luxury, elegant, tasteful, expensive, but none of it could scrub the emotional weight from her bones. She had married a stranger, a powerful stranger who claimed little and revealed even less. A man whose body language was a cipher, whose silence said more than most people's speeches. And now she was in his house, in his wing, in his bed, or, at least one he'd prepared for her. After toweling off, she reached for the silk robe hanging behind the door. It was deep emerald, soft as breath, and smelled faintly of jasmine and something darker. Leather, maybe. A note in the pocket read simply size S. "The one I thought you'd pick. T." She nearly dropped it, but she wore it anyway. She padded barefoot. Across the room, lights dimmed to a soft amber. The night breeze pressed gently at the curtains. Her hair was still damp, a towel wrapped around her shoulders. She felt less like a bride, and more like a puzzle missing the picture on the box. Moving slowly, she explored the room with new eyes. She opened a drawer beside the bed and found journals, leather-bound, untouched. A second drawer held silk scarves and eye masks. There was a shelf of books, mostly fiction, some classics, a few volumes in Yoruba. The perfumes on the vanity were mostly European, but one amber and oud smelled like home. She stopped in front of the tall window, pulled back the sheer curtains. From here, she could see part of the garden where the reception had taken place. The lights had been switched off, but she could still make out the shape of the tables. The curve of the path where she danced, where she'd faked her way through every smile. Her reflection ghosted in the glass soft robe, bare feet braid undone. She barely recognized herself. A bride in a stranger's kingdom. She slipped between the sheets, surprised by how soft they were, cool crisp cotton with a faint scent of rosewood. The pillows were plump but firm, the divan impossibly light. The bed could have belonged in a luxury resort if not for the tension pooling in her shoulders. She lay on her side, staring at the golden lamp beside the bed, the rest of the room bathed in gentle shadow. Her eyes kept drifting toward the door across the room, the one that hadn't opened since she arrived. He must have his own room. That had been the assumption. Everything about Tate Aramu had screamed distance, precision. He didn't seem like the kind of man who would want to share a bed with a woman he barely knew. Especially not a woman who'd made no secret of her unwillingness. And honestly, she was relieved. A separate room meant no awkward first night expectations, no small talk, no pretending. She pulled the duvet up to her chest and let out a breath. For the first time all day, she felt still. Her mind slowed, the weight of the day pressing gently, instead of suffocating. The party, the vows, the cameras, it all blurred into the quiet hum of her own thoughts. Her eyes were just starting to flutter closed when she heard it. A soft click, the door handle turning, the quiet creak of hinges. Her eyes snapped open. Someone was coming in. The door moved slowly, deliberately, and then he walked in. He stepped through the doorway with the ease of someone returning to his own room. No chair, no wheels, no cane. Tadama was walking perfectly. Leona froze. Her mind reeled, eyes wide, breath shallow, as if blinking might correct what she was seeing. But there he was, tall, steady, bare feet moving soundlessly against the wood floor. His frame was relaxed in a fitted black t-shirt, soft cotton pants that swayed just slightly with his steps. His movements were fluid. Not a limp, not a drag, not a wobble. Every step was deliberate, balanced. Sure, her mouth went dry. He wasn't disabled. He had never been. He glanced up and caught her staring. And instead of flinching, instead of scrambling for explanation, he held her gaze with maddening calm, like this moment had been waiting for her. He didn't speak, didn't explain. He just walked across the room, slowly, silently, his body lit by the warm glow of the bedside lamp, every shadow carving across his jawline like it had been planned. She sat up, instinctively clutching the duvet to her chest. "You?" He tilted his head. She couldn't find the rest of the sentence. She stared at his legs, at the controlled power in the way he moved, like a man trained in elegance, in calculated presence. Not a man recovering, not a man adjusting, a man who had never needed help. He finally spoke, voice low and smooth. "You were expecting wheels." She blinked hard. "I was told," everyone said. "I let them say it." His tone wasn't proud. It wasn't defensive. It was simply true. She could feel the floor of her assumptions cracking beneath her. Tate walked to the nightstand and picked up a small glass bottle, uncapped it, drank, still silent, still poised, still not limping.